Can you hear
How's
us?
it going? I can hear you.
It's going great. This is Katrina, and this is my friend
Hi,
Portia.
Hi,
Katrina.
nice to meet you
Hey,
via
Portia.
call.
Via call. Yes.
I was going to say, it's going to be interesting because we can't see each other.
I know. Are you guys in the same place? Or are you also
We are.
separate?
We have this, really high-tech setup of this little folding table and two
Yes.
random chairs
Mhm.
and a computer.
How all the best podcasts have started, to be
Right,
honest.
But you're so sweet to come on to our show. I really appreciate it because I know you are so busy. And she's at a conference right now,
Oh,
Portia,
wow.
in Nashville. Today, we are joined by Christina Arredondo, who is one of my former co-residents from Yale, and we are so glad that she's here.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, Christina.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I know you are a busy female doctor doing all sorts of different things. I wanted to just give our listeners a quick bio about you because you do so much. So Dr. Arredondo currently resides in her hometown of Tucson, Arizona, where she is raising her family amongst an extensive family unit. She's traveled all throughout the United States and beyond for both pleasure and education. After graduating from Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota with a bachelor's in psychology, she worked in mental health treatment in San Francisco and tobacco cessation research at Stanford. Dr. Arredondo completed medical school at the University of Washington in Seattle, and then her psychiatry residency and public psychiatry fellowship at Yale, where I met her and where she saved my butt a couple of times when I was on really busy call shifts.
The good old days.
Oh my gosh. Okay. After training, she returned home to Tucson as she's always desired to serve her Southern Arizona community. Since that time, she's worked, it seems like everywhere in inpatient care,
Everywhere.
emergency
Yep.
care, private, tribal, public sectors, and she's currently the medical director of several opiate treatment programs, as well as the medical director of behavioral health at a local federally qualified health center. Her interests lie in capacity building, epidemiology, native health, transgender health, data management and surveillance, addiction services, integration of culture into a medical model of care, and helping bring about behavioral change. So basically, all the cool stuff.
The fun stuff for sure.
When she's
What I do.
working, she likes to travel, read, make music, and raise her 3 young daughters, along with 4 loud dogs, 12 chickens, and a desert tortoise.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah.
It really is a full house. So anyway, welcome, Christina.
Thank
so much for
you.
joining us to
As you can tell, I love a little bit of chaos, so this is great.
I know. I was telling Portia when I mentioned, like, how would you feel about us having a guest host? Like, we've never done that before. But when I was rewatching this movie, I was thinking about you, and I was like, I bet she would have some interesting, views on this. And I feel like I can't remember how far ahead of me you were in residency, like 2 or 3 years.
2, I think 2. Oh my goodness, I don't know. It's 2 years, I think.
I think so, but I always just remember you I was always just watching you from afar. It's like, oh, okay, so this is how you have kids. Oh, how'd you get maternity leave? Or just every couple of years, I feel like I reach out to you with a random question about how do you do all of this stuff? And you've always been helpful.
I always knew how to do it because I always knew how to ask questions because it's so hard to do this stuff on your own.
It's really
hard to figure it out. Yeah.
So where should we start, Portia?
So I had never seen Encanto until this week. So I don't know if either of you, had watched it many times, probably prior to me. So I just, maybe for some background, I have a very older family. I'm kind of weirdly placed so that there's really no young children anymore. Like the next wave will come at some point, but I think I just haven't been exposed to Disney, content in a really long time. So I was kind of a little bit scared to watch this because typically I think I'm a little traumatized from Bambi. Dumbo and Bambi. And just tragic animals and just so I was nervous, but I did enjoy it. Couple tears shed, but really it was appropriately. So I think that I'm coming from this place watching the movie, but I'm excited to hear what maybe someone's watched it many more times.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. How did you feel
Yeah.
it was similar or different from like the old school Disney movies we grew up with?
I feel like it was maybe like more appropriate, like almost just a little bit lighter, really colorful, like really engaging. I really liked the music. I thought the songs were really catchy. I thought for like kids, I think it felt like a little bit of simplified, like you could still pick up on bigger themes, but in a simple way. And then for adults, like there's a lot
to really think about.
Yeah. What about you guys?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I feel like the newer movies, one, they make me cry a little more, but two, I think they just tackle these really big issues in a way that maybe kids, I don't know if my kids really sort of understood the underlying like underpinnings of trauma and
Right.
everything else that was happening in this movie, but I think they were understanding that there was feelings and that people like, weren't perfect and, all the kind of stuff that we don't really see in some of the older movies. They don't have that sort of depth that I think the newer movies have.
Totally. And I think the newer movies, even movies like Frozen, I feel like when I was growing up, Disney was all about like the princess finding her husband at all costs. Like that was the goal. And now all their movies, like they're just different. The goals are different.
True.
It's not always about finding your spouse. And they just have a lot of deeper themes. And I love that, like this one, Encanto and Frozen, there is a strong family theme. Like in Frozen, the sisters save each other. And here it's more about exploring the family unit rather than
like a romantic being the main.
Right.
Yeah.
And
and raising 3 kids, I have to say I'm very appreciative of that. That it's not all about being sort of the romantic princess. Not that it's a bad thing, but that I just feel like there's just more to learn and the flaws of it, like being able to be flawed.
Yeah.
And being okay with it and getting that acceptance is so important for kids these days.
Right, exactly. And I think too, having, kids, perhaps even more so little girls, grow up and see characters like the girls that are depicted in this movie. I just love, right? Like their body shapes, even like that, just like period, how they're drawn are all different, and they're very different from the classic Disney princess. Their skin tones are different from the classic princesses, and even within the family, you can see different shades. They have different talents, different flaws, and I'm sure that was an intentional choice here.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Christina, I'm curious. I'm assuming you had seen this movie before.
I have probably seen this movie. I think when it first came out, it was on almost 24/7 when the kids are watching TV.
Yeah.
They just, even if they weren't like sitting there watching, they just wanted it on. They wanted to hear the music. They would sit and stop and watch certain parts, and then they would go back to doing what they were doing. So I watched it a lot. And then I intentionally went back and rewatched it this week because it's a great movie and I love it, but it's also a hard movie to watch. At times it has a lot of themes to it that I think maybe hit very close to home, or a lot of what I do in my day-to-day work. And it just brings out a lot of those feelings of kind of helping people with these experiences, or maybe even experience it myself. So it's a great movie. I love it. I don't think that I could watch it all the time as much as my kids wanted to watch it.
Right. Yeah, totally. I can't remember exactly how long ago this movie came out, but I remember when it came out just being really struck by how deep it was. And again, like you were saying, Christina, I think children watching it start to get some of it. And I like to hope that somewhere they're absorbing these messages that like, you don't have to be perfect and we all love you just for who you are, and, things like that. But I think some of the deeper themes about, displacement and intergenerational trauma and family structures and all those complicated dynamics. I remember, there's a couple of like female physician Facebook groups I'm in. And I remember when this came out, like the floodgates opened and everyone
Oh my goodness.
about
Yes.
it. And especially Luisa's song Surface Pressure, just like really like my jaw dropped to the floor. I was like, how did you put this into words?
How did you know, right?
Yeah, how'd you know?
Exactly.
So, since you're our special guest, Christina, I guess I'll ask you, where do you want to get started? Do you want to talk about the individual characters, some of the themes, and how it relates to your work or mental health in general? What feels like a good place to start?
I mean, I think it's important to talk about some of the characteristics that we might see. I think Disney did a really good job of showing kind of within the different generations sort of what came out from that trauma. Because what we do know is that different generations experience the trauma of the prior generation a bit differently. And I think that, Disney did a really good job, I think, of showing those characteristics within each of those generations in the movie.
Right. So I totally agree. So the main trauma we saw, which we don't really see the full lengths of it till like the end of the movie. But basically it looks like Abuela and her husband were trying to, they had like just gotten pregnant. They were going to have triplets. They were so happy. And then it seems like they were alluding to some kind of war. Was that your impression?
I think some local, either, I don't know if it's like a cartel or some kind of organization, sort of criminal organization that was sort of taking over and fighting against locals. And I believe she was already pregnant when they ended up fleeing. I mean, she had already delivered when she
was like
ended up fleeing.
3 babies and reaching out, and that's when I started like bawling every time. I'm just like, oh my God, you can just like feel the pain. And then I think somewhere in there, the candle emerges as this representation of a miracle. And I was curious to hear both of your perspectives about, what do you think that candle really represents? Because I guess it could be like a real physical candle in a concrete sense, but do you think that was meant to be imagery of some kind?
I do. I think that if I remember correctly, I think it's the candle from when they got married. And so when she was holding it, kind of lighting the way, I think it was sort of a representation of their marriage and their love for each other, and his love for her and the protection that he tried to give her.
Because she would often, kind of speak to him at times in the film, and, looking for his advice or looking for like strength from him, or, him to guide her. And it, like maybe through the candle, that was her experience. That was definitely when I cried.
For sure.
And I thought it was interesting. I know some people have kind of talked about how at the beginning she shares more of like a, watered down version of how she got to this place. It's like this story, which, is, I'm assuming how she kind of initially was coping with it and then what the family knew. But really, later on, she's able then to share the real version, which is really heartbreaking and traumatic and but ultimately helps people understand her more or understand the experience.
Like where she's coming from.
You could even see that a bit in the way that they did the drawings and the camera, because at the beginning when they're showing, when she's talking to Maribel about, losing, your papa was gone, it was very, like you said, watered down. It was just very, it didn't give a lot of specifics. And when Maribel was kind of looking at the picture when we were thinking about it, you saw the grandmother from the front and she was kind of leaning over, but you didn't see her face. But later on, when Maribel was actually talking to her grandmother and she was giving her the full story, like you saw it from the side, and you actually got to see in that time, like the grandmother's like pain and the horribleness of what she was experiencing in that moment. So it kind of just allowed us to like, actually, she opened up a little bit more and she was able to like show not only visually, but just kind of, it gave you a visceral reaction when you saw it.
Exactly. And I'm always just so impressed when people creating these movies on that level can just so capture something and communicate it in such a strong way and in so many different ways that it really just hits you. And I'm sure all of us in our different lines of work see the effects of intergenerational trauma and how it can really trickle down. And there's so much research about it now, even on a really granular genetic, neuroscientific level. And I was just like, wow, who came up with this idea and like put it all together in such a beautiful way?
I was curious if they had some specialists that were helping them out, because it was just so true to sort of what I saw.
They must, and that is one of our selfish, delusional, grandiose goals with this podcast, is maybe someday
Disney will come calling.
That would be cool. Just to give a rundown of the characters. So we have Abuela, the matriarch of the family. Again, I thought that was, I'm curious, Christina, if you see this a lot in your work, but I feel like that is very typical, that there is a matriarch in the family. And then she has her three children, the triplets. Julieta, who is Mirabel's mother, her special gift is healing with cooking. We have Tio Bruno, or Uncle Bruno, who his special gift is seeing the future, and then he's sort of the black sheep of the family, gets shunned, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then we have Tia Peppa, or Auntie Peppa. She's the character whose mood controls the weather. And then the families of these three, we see that Julieta marries a man, and they have three children. The oldest, Isabella, is the perfect sister. She's the one who can make flowers grow and just is totally perfect. The second oldest, Luisa, I love her. I think she's my favorite character. And she's the strong one. She can't be weak. Nothing really hurts her. And then the third sister, Mirabel, who's the protagonist, the main character of the movie, is the one who doesn't get a gift. And we don't really understand why till the end. And then there's a couple of important cousins. Dolores, who is the one who has the super hearing abilities, and Camillo, who is the shapeshifter. And then the other main character was Mariano, who is sort of the boyfriend of Isabella, who
kind of a macho,
suave. Right, but also has this like depth.
Well, sensitive, yes, very sensitive.
And things like that. But so we see these three generations. And then what was the name of the little boy who got his gift? Antonio,
yeah.
Antonio, he can like speak to the animals and everything. So we see these three generations and how they're all interacting with each other. And I kind of got the sense that, Abuela's sort of running this show, so to speak, running the family. They get this miracle candle, which leads them to this casita, this magical house. And when they come of age, they each get a gift. And even that sort of premise reminded me in so many different cultures of the coming of age sort of quinceañera, the bat mitzvah, so many different things in all sorts of different cultures. There's usually some sort of celebration when you're coming of age. And it seems like for them, they each get this special gift that then the whole family uses to kind of help their community is sort of the sense I got. And I always wondered, like, did Abuela feel like she owed that to the community, or that was her way of giving back for living? I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
I just get the sense that she just felt this sense of obligation, or this sense of like a weight about what happened. And that she, the survivors, and just feeling like she now had to take on everything. Now, not only was she given, these children, but she was also, three babies, but she also had this community, she had this power, that to support this community. It just felt like it must have felt this overwhelming sense of, I have to keep things going. I maybe am the one that needs to keep doing this. And I feel like a lot of people who have had this trauma, or have immigrated, or, just have had these experiences, sometimes feel this sense of weight, and they have to do well. They have to support the next generation. And she just maybe kind of took that to, which we see a lot, this extreme that had ended up leading to difficulty and stress that was sort of intolerable for that second or third generation.
Right. I think we do see this, right, in all of our work. And, I've worked with patients who either their parents were first generation immigrants, or they're first generation immigrants, but their parents are now here. And there is, as they're sort of progressing through their life, there is this tension between, wanting to individuate and sort of move away from their nuclear family, but then also feeling obligated to take care of them. And sometimes not even just their direct, parents, siblings, but the broader family unit or their community. And I think we see that to different degrees in different cultures. We certainly see that in this movie.
Absolutely. And I think Disney, I think, did a good job of individualizing ways that it could affect the kids. And, you see that in Louisa. She's expected to be perfect and expected to, kind of follow this track. She's supposed to marry this man and all this stuff that's supposed to happen to her, but that she just wants nothing to do with that. She wants to be herself and she wants to be an individual. She doesn't want to be perfect. She doesn't want that weight. The same thing with Louisa, who's is expected to help everybody and always, and almost kind of seemingly just never kind of question it. But at the same time, she's not able to really support her own mental health.
Right.
And we see that so much, and it's so important that was sort of pulled out.
I know. I couldn't believe they did such a good job with those two sisters.
Yeah.
Mirabel being the third one. I was like, how did they even know the birth order?
Yes.
Like,
exactly, perfectly.
Like the perfect one, the strong one, and then, we don't know what to do with you.
I think Dolores, the cousin who has the super hearing, I mean, besides, I think seeing the future, which I would not want to do personally,
no.
But I think, super hearing just reminded me almost of like this profession. And just like how much she heard, right? Like that she didn't need to or shouldn't have heard.
Yeah.
She heard that Bruno was there the whole time.
You're right.
And, she was like holding that secret. So I think there's also like secrets that get, held because we can't share them. And maybe it's not safe to, or it feels like it would upset the system too much. So we have to keep them to ourselves.
That's a really good point, Portia.
Yeah. And you see that so much in families that have had trauma, right? The kids end up sort of inappropriately or not even meaning to, not purposefully always, like seeing things and hearing things and that maybe was not always child appropriate or age appropriate for them. And they sort of take that on. And it's such a common thing to see, a common theme. And then they move on to their adulthood and that trauma that you see in that first generation now becomes more complex trauma, which comes with its own difficulties and possible path of, psychology. And it's just such an interesting way to do that. You think she just hears, but no, she's hearing stuff she shouldn't really be hearing and having, like you said, having to keep it a secret. And that's a big weight to put on your soul.
Right. I know it just seems like, this whole family unit rests on everyone playing their role the exact right way. And it seemed like Abuela sort of, I don't know if she had any control or power over the gifts they each got.
I don't think so.
It seemed like at some point, though, with Bruno and with Mirabel, like not getting a gift, she had some control over it, if I remember correctly, but I might be misremembering.
I think they were all very confused by that. And I think at the end, I think there's a lot of interpretations about why she didn't get the gift and why at the end the house sort of responded to her. I've heard people say, like, the way that I think is that, she was sort of meant to take on sort of some leadership or, place in this family. And so she wasn't sort of burdened with like a specific gift, but ultimately she's kind of the soul of the family, bringing them together. And that maybe she was sort of meant to, in a less toxic manner, lead this family to a healthier place and sort of be the next abuela in the next sort of generation. And that's why her gift was, the house responded at the end when things were more healthy.
Right. The imperfect but stable foundation. Again, even like the imagery of the house is so great.
Yes.
Yeah. It made me think of a little bit of like Beauty and the Beast, just with like all the, the plates moving around. I mean, very, very, but just I love that, the house itself was like this living, breathing creature that, was so connected to Mirabel. I think that too, kind of like what we were just saying, Abuela doesn't have a gift beyond she, is the handle. She's the carrier of the candle almost. Yeah. So it's almost like Mirabel now is like, I don't know. They're alike in so many ways. Yeah.
And then as you're saying that, I'm thinking like, was there any competitiveness between the two of them that maybe Abuela couldn't even recognize or put into words or at some point? Because it does seem like Mirabel was always feeling like, and then the scene where she directly says it to the Abuela, like, I'm never going to be good enough for you, am I? I mean, that's another time where the tears just fall on my end. But it's so true. I think the way she was relating to her and perhaps to all the family members, I don't think it was intentional. I don't think she was like maliciously trying to make them all feel not good enough. But I think with everyone having their their role to play, and if they don't want to play it or not, they all kind of felt that way. That there would be drastic consequences if they didn't conform or do their job right.
Yeah, I see this a lot in terms of when you have the person in the family that wants to start opening up trauma and bringing it forward and putting voice to it, it scares people. It's hard for people to, you can't force someone to do this. And so, I kind of felt like Maribel was the voice for what was happening. And she was the one that was starting to, say, hey, the house doesn't look great, or, kind of starting to notice, hey, Louisa doesn't look great, or, all this kind of stuff was happening. She was seeing that there was cracks in how things were going. And I feel like that when there's trauma in family, that often happens, that there's somebody who starts kind of pushing and poking, and it doesn't always end up great, but maybe, we know with trauma that sometimes being able to process it out a little bit more in the open is helpful. It's, what we want people to be able to do, maybe not right away, but, ultimately to take away some of that power. And I feel like that was kind of maybe Maribel's role.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because Bruno was kind of, exiled for potentially bringing, this to light. And, we could
he did it.
all propose the why, he didn't make it happen and she did. But I think that's just an example of what also happens, if someone comes in and tries to disrupt the system, sometimes we're, we push them away. It's dangerous.
Abuela seemed scared a couple times when she thought that the candle was going out or the house was kind of breaking down, and you could see it give her a sigh of relief as something kept going. So, she was just kind of holding it tightly together.
Yeah. I mean, I thought Abuela just demonstrated such strong depictions of both the hypervigilance and hyperarousal that can come from trauma, like, really holding on tight. And she even says in, I think, one of the final songs, I'm sorry I was holding on too tight. I was so afraid of losing you again. And then also this sort of dissociative nature that can come from an extreme trauma of, having to exile Bruno because you just can't face it, or, not going into all the details about what actually happened because you just can't face it, trying to sort of turn the trauma narrative into this romantic story that now we have the celebration when people get their gift, and sort of totally displacing and disregarding all the pain that came with it because it's just too frightening.
Yeah. And I think you can see that with Tia Pepa when she has the clouds coming in and, Abuela is like, no, it's raining. Put those away. Put those away. It's like, that's visually like almost exactly
what's happening.
Yeah. And, I liked that a lot.
Right.
In kind of a silly way, like, what of these gifts would you want? Like God. which sounds maybe scary, and maybe, we don't want them in the way that they're initially using them, but I don't know. I would really like the flowers. It's like so beautiful, creating, I don't really want the super hearing. I don't need to know everything, but the weather's cool. Like, I don't know. What do you guys think?
What do you think, Christina?
Oh my goodness. I never thought about that. I mean, as you see at the beginning, that I have a lot of animals, so I think I would prefer to be able to like hear and understand what the animals are saying. But I think in the grand scheme of this discussion, I don't think I would want any of them. I feel like it's just too much pressure. It's so much pressure to like know and feel like do something that other people can't, and then have everybody looking at you all the time for it.
Yeah. Seriously. I think of all the gifts, if I had to pick one, I'd want to heal people with cooking. That seems pretty lovely.
Yes.
It maybe appeals to my inner healer. But what you just said, Christina, so resonates with me. And Louisa, I just like so resonated with this character. And in her song Surface Pressure, I kept thinking of intern year over and over and over. Just like that pressure you have to like look like you know what you're doing. It's not really safe to ask for help. People's lives are literally in your hands sometimes. And just, it seems like Louisa really felt that in a different way, but I just think like that character must resonate with so many different people.
Well, I think that's why you saw the response in the physician women's forums. But I see it like even now, I hear myself saying it, because I'm busy and I'm doing a master's and I have kids. And sometimes I'm like, if I could just get through this one homework assignment, or if I could finish these notes, I would be much better. And you just kind of push through it.
Yeah,
And then
the pile.
Totally the opposite of what we tell our
I
patients
know.
to do, right? That we tell our patients, like, hey, you have to build in the self-care, that you have to be able to let go of stuff and,
And ask for help.
it's, yeah, and be able to say, hey, I'm not going to do this well right now. Like, can I put this off? And all the stuff that we always talk about, but it's so hard to do. And that's why I think we as women physicians are, I think a lot of people, but I think it's especially kind of really resonated with Louisa.
Yeah. And also, I think it's also a great depiction of how, the system also has to be open to helping you. Like for so long, if Louisa had expressed any weakness or asked for help, I don't think the system would have been like, oh, that's okay. I don't think Abuela at the beginning of the movie would have said like, oh, that's okay. You can take a day off.
Go take a day off, right?
Yeah. Or we can help you. Isabella can help you,
Right.
Yeah, again, I just love this movie. I love the colors. I love the animation. I love the music. So good.
Yeah, I was humming the Bruno song. I just got very stuck in there for a couple of days after. It's sweet, I really liked it. I was happily, not devastated to my core thinking about like animals dying after. That to me, I guess, is a trigger. Obviously those society commercials know what they're doing. But I was really pleasantly surprised.
I know there's still, in Disney movies, like someone always has to die in this like awful way, which I also think is fascinating. That,
why? I feel like that doesn't have to happen. I think you can build tension in other ways, but you're right. There's always a parent or somebody passes.
Or like primary caregiver. I'm just like, from the beginning, like, what's up with Walt Disney? Like, what's his attachment trauma? Or whoever started movies? Like, what are we trying to do, guys? But so we still had that. But in such a more nuanced, beautiful, complex way. And I just love at the end, when the community members show up to sort of help them rebuild the house, and that leading up to that scene in the song between Mirabel and Abuela just really gets your heart. And I'm just like, wow, Mirabel has such psychological resilience after everything she's been through to still be able to hold on to her own experience and pain, and then also be able to listen and empathize and appreciate her grandmother's pain despite everything that's come from it.
I struggled with her a little bit. I really love her character, but at times she just, I just felt bad for her, to be honest. I felt a lot of empathy when I was watching her, and the times when she was trying really hard to just sort of smile through it. She had to be the chipper one and was always so loving and just happy and teaching the other kids and singing with them. I felt for her because I feel like so many people feel they have to do that, and I was kind of very like relieved emotionally when she was able to sort of let that go at the end, because it just felt like how much further, she didn't have a gift that was burdening her, but I think almost like the fact that she just couldn't, she couldn't really feel, or she couldn't kind of put out there like all the thoughts and feelings she was having was sort of her own burden. And in general, I feel like maybe this is what's teaching us, is that Maribel, the future, like potentially as this leader of this family, is going to allow people to be themselves and allow people to relieve some of that stress. And maybe because she understands it and she's able to verbalize her feelings in a way that maybe wasn't done before.
Yeah, definitely. When she, when she and Isabella were sort of singing their song, and Isabella's dyeing her hair and growing sharp things and all different colors and stuff, and then Abuela comes and like immediately the tension is felt and
returns,
and Mirabel just lets it out. I was like, yes, finally, but also, oh, that's so sad, and you could tell it was so hard for her to do, and she's sort of ran away. The house crumbles and everything's crumbling.
Yeah. It's something I see in the younger generations. I feel like they're more wanting to be open about things, whereas some of my older patients are still having a hard time. They still try to keep it in. I think there's just, there is a really distinct generational shift with how people handle emotions and feelings, and there's a change to come in, I think.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, even like these movies reflecting all these feelings, right, and like making room for them. And I'm thinking of the Disney movie Inside Out, which came before this, which we'll have to for another time.
I have not seen it.
Portia, yeah.
Oh,
it's so good.
That one's very good as well.
But again, it's like all talking about feelings and sadness and grief and all the complexities, not just the happy, romantic, loving feelings, which I think is really great.
Yeah. So, I mean, thinking about more people kind of reaching out or being more comfortable with emotions makes me just kind of jump to like treatment. I mean, and
oh yeah, Christina, we always like to think about like if we were treating these characters, what would we do?
And I think, partly just asking the question, like who comes to treatment, who doesn't, who has access to treatment, who doesn't, who does treatment feel unsafe to, or bringing an outsider into a system. So, despite some of those things being barriers, I guess maybe if you had Abuela in front of you.
Do you think she'd show up?
If she did, which I think, would probably be difficult. I'm not sure if she'd be open to it, but
I think she might come to like a family session, maybe.
Yes.
I feel like the one who would most likely show up would be Bruno, but maybe not voluntarily. Like he's sort of like, to me, seems like the identified patient of the family. Are you familiar with that lingo?
Yeah. And at the end he was telling people how it was, and hey, I didn't mean this. This is what I meant. And I think he might do well in therapy.
Yeah. I caught some sort of whiffs of maybe some like OCD-ish stuff going on with him up there in the attic with the rats.
It's possible.
But I don't know, Christina, what do you think about Abuela and treatment?
I think it would be very hard for her. And I see this in my own family. I think the oldest generations just can't have a really hard time verbalizing trauma, their own trauma. And I think they spent their whole lives not kind of bearing it down and not talking about it. And whether that's healthy or not, like we can't force them to talk about it, right? So the best thing we can do is, I always tell people like, look, I'm not going to force you to talk about something that's traumatic. I understand that might take time, if ever, but I can talk about how maybe it's affecting you, like how, like what it's affecting your place in your family and your world, and we can focus on that symptomatically. But I just think it's really hard for the older generation to really kind of let that go.
Right. Like we wouldn't be referring Abuela to EMDR or CPT.
No, I don't think so. That would be more sort of supportive care. I mean, and maybe just doing some processing, but it would be a very slow thing, I think.
Right, like a displaced, really focusing on the here and now. If she's, I think more toward the end, she can acknowledge, negative feelings a lot better than at the beginning. I feel like one of the newer generations, one of the cousins, or like Luisa or Isabella, maybe even Isabella maybe she has to go to like marriage therapy. She can get married, and that's how we get them in.
If she ever wants to. I didn't get the impression she ever wanted to get married.
Yeah, I know. Maybe she doesn't. Or maybe Luisa. She's felt like, I think her or Mirabelle would be the ones to seek it out.
Yeah, I think so. I think they were a little bit more open to doing that, and maybe some, EMDR, maybe some interpersonal or like, kind of some family therapy would be like really effective for them. But I think the one thing that this movie kind of does a little bit of a disservice about trauma in general is that it's not so easy to just open up like they did and suddenly, you accept it. And right. So even when you do tend to bring up trauma and things are open and people are talking about it, it's not a like straight line forward to recovery, right? It goes back and forth and up and down, and and people, it might kind of re-traumatize it and kind of like more detachment, and then you come back. And so, but it's a Disney movie, and what can you expect? It's not as serious. It's not anything else that we're going to get sort of that longevity of what actually happens when people are trying to recover from trauma.
Right. It's like an idealized depiction of what trauma recovery could look like in a system like this. But you're right. It's a lot messier when you're in the trenches for real.
Very much so.
Like what positive, traits people develop from also experiencing trauma, like you did all of these things to keep the people around you safe, or you had to set up this system because that was how you survived. And can you get to a place at some point in your life where you can kind of ask that part to step back? I'm no longer in danger. Can you, help me not be so dissociative, or help me not be so activated?
Right. Even just doing some real good, like deep breathing lessons with everyone. We could start there.
Absolutely. And the resiliency. I mean, like you said, that's the one thing that I see coming out of that's kind of can be positive is the sense of really a deep sense of resiliency that some people with trauma have to experience to survive what they do. So it's not the best way I want to teach people how to get resiliency, but it happens, and you can honor that.
Right. And often I find, when talking with my patients these days about diagnoses like PTSD or complex trauma or whatever you want to call it, just like hard things in life, that seem to happen. I think focusing not only on the like PTSD type piece, or the piece that's really bothering them or getting in the way of their functioning, but then also being able to focus on the resiliency piece and the strengths they've gained, and being able to tell them, like, you're not going to lose that either. That's part of you, and you'll carry that with you too. Can be really helpful, at least in helping people sort of hear that they might have some effects from trauma. A lot of people really struggle to see themselves as someone who's been quote unquote traumatized. That can be really stigmatizing or scary.
Especially when there's like a collective trauma, or when there's so much. I think people, it's not just like that you downplay it, but this person had so much worse of an experience.
Yes. I always call this the trauma Olympics.
Right.
Yes.
I'm not here to hand out a gold,
right. And you'll see that between generations, right? Somebody will say, well, you didn't have to deal with this. Well, it's a different type of trauma, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's worse or better. I mean, nobody's putting a scale to it and seeing which one's heavier,
Yeah, right. Exactly. And it's a fine line between, being reflective and giving yourself context, and then minimizing your own experience, or minimizing the next generation's experience, if you did have it worse.
Or minimizing your own. Yeah. Because I'll have people say, well, I didn't have to deal with, what my mother had to deal with. Right. So why am I feeling so bad about what happened to me? And I'm like, well, it's not the same thing. You're a different person, a different experience, different place. But I think ultimately, I mean, what if anything comes out of something like this would be that, I just want people to know that you can work with trauma, and it might take time to do therapy. There's so many options out there for different types of trauma therapy, and you don't have to go in and talk about your trauma immediately. That's not the goal, right? So let's, just be open, hopefully people are open of going out and giving it a chance,
Right. Right. I totally agree, Christina. I, find working with people with trauma can be so rewarding. It can be so hard, but so rewarding when they are able to, show up and put words to their authentic feelings and really work through it. People can really get better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then their family can get better.
And the next generation.
Right.
And the next generation, because we forget that there's, epigenetics is a real thing, and that when we have trauma, like we are literally changing ourselves at a genetic level, and that gets passed on. I struggle sometimes with when you hear things like, a certain like racial group, it has, certain characteristics or a certain high burden of disease, and must be because of something they're doing now. Well, no, the reality is it's probably from something hundreds of years in play, and that's where it's coming out now. It's we forget the importance of what happens before us to where we are now.
Right, 100%. I was just nerding out a little bit and reading some like research studies about this stuff with epigenetics, how it can kind of like change your DNA, so to speak. But then also how when you seek good trauma therapy, I was reading this specifically as it relates to the mother-infant dyad, and how even mothers who are raised in difficult environments or go through trauma in their life and have an insecure attachment can develop a secure attachment with their own infant a lot of times by psychologically processing what they've been through and being able to see it in a more balanced way. So it's all fascinating, but certainly this movie really depicts intergenerational trauma and the effects it can have, and also the hope, I think. Again, it's a Disney movie, so we always leave on the
But it's a good introduction, I think, to the idea of, intergenerational trauma. I think it's a good introduction for people to even think about immigration and displacement and how families cope with that experience, and then just all the things that come along with any family dynamic.
And then even just kids watching to know, like, oh, I don't have to be perfect. I think even that message is great.
Yes. At the very basic level, right? We want people to realize you could just be yourself and nobody's we don't want you to feel this pressure to be something.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, any other final thoughts, Christina, as we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think we hit all the really big spots. It's the like you said, the very basic level, please. Like I see it in myself and think, oh, wow, is this really attachment to my child what I want? Should I go to therapy? I mean, I think always questioning and looking at your relationships and saying, like, am I seeing trends in how I react to things? Should I really have somebody like talk this over with somebody, especially if you've had like a history of trauma? Like, just always go out and reach out when you're seeing things, even if it feels like it's nothing. And I think a lot of people will be like, well, I just kind of thought this was who I was, and I didn't realize this was something I could work on. There's always something you could work on.
Right. And I have a friend who always refers to trauma as like, it's not just the big T traumas that we think about, but like a lot of people experience trauma just if they've felt neglected, invalidated constantly. There's all sorts of different ways that trauma can leave marks. So I think we're all in agreement here.
I think that's a good message.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Christina. We appreciate this so much.
Oh, no. Thank you for having me as your first guest. This is amazing. That's an honor. I really enjoyed it.
Well, good. Maybe we'll have you back sometime.
Absolutely.
And thank you again so much. I so appreciate it. It was nice to chat with you again.
Yes, nice talking to you again, and nice meeting you, Portia.
You too. Right. Thanks,
all right. Bye-bye.
Bye. This podcast and its contents are a copyright of Analyzed Scripts, all rights reserved. Any redistribution or reproduction of part or all of the contents in any form is prohibited. Unless you want to share it with your friends and rate, review, and subscribe, that's fine. All stories and characters discussed are fictional in nature. No identification with actual persons, living or deceased, places, buildings, or products is intended or should be inferred. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The podcast and its contents do not constitute professional, mental health, or medical advice. Listeners might consider consulting a mental health provider if they need assistance with any mental health problems or concerns. As always, please call 911 or go directly to your nearest emergency room for any psychiatric emergencies. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.